Hello and welcome to another session of Application Development Today. My name is Don Jackson. I'm a Chief Technologist here at OpenText, and I'm also your host for Application Development Today. And I'm pleased to have with me today Mr. Ryan Falk of Falk Consulting. We've known each other for a few years now, quite a few years actually, unfortunately for him. So Ryan, if you just want to introduce yourself.
Sure. Don, thanks for having me. Again, my name is Ryan Falk. I'm the president and CEO, founder of Falk Consulting. This is our 22nd year of business at Falk Consulting, based out of Detroit, Michigan. But obviously, as you know, we have vast coverage throughout the United States in terms of our presence, not only from a sales perspective, but from a consulting perspective. But again, I appreciate the time, Don. As always, I look forward to our meetings, whether that's in person because you're right down the road, or if that's wherever the journey may take us.
Yep. So today's topic is shift everywhere. So I kind of teased this on our last episode, shift left. Everybody's probably heard the term of shift left, shift right, but shift up. And I kind of teased on there, what is shift up? But, let's talk about the two that, people have probably heard about more often. So Ryan, if you could just kind of explain to the audience, for those of us who don't know, what is shift left and where does that name come from, right? What is left, right? Is this for left-handed people, right-handed, or what?
So my mother-in-law is left-handed, so I'm not allowed to make fun of left-handed people. She would tell me.
My son too.
Okay. Okay. So if you look at it from a standpoint of from a left to right perspective, it's essentially application development life cycles, right? Look at it in terms of how you write on a piece of paper. When you're creating a sentence or a series of paragraphs, you're starting from the left and you're moving to the right, and that's your output, if you will. So that same output can fundamentally be looked at in terms of how applications are developed. And anyone that's probably listening to, this podcast, this video, however they're consuming it, this is sort of like common sense to them to some degree, right? But fundamentally, what are we really talking about? What is shift left? So early on in the cycle, you're dealing with requirements, you're dealing with development. You're dealing with potential integrations that are required, and then as you get further and further to right, you're looking at testing, you're looking at UAT, user acceptance testing, you're looking at preconditions for deployment, you're looking at deployment, and then you're looking at run, right? So in a lot of cases, if you look at large software products, they have sort of like the plan, develop, run model, if you will, and that's their way of saying here's how we view the world left to right. So what is shift left? So if we're truly shifting left, most of our concerted effort is going from where we start from or where we finish from a production release level and ing most of our human and or progress effort as far left as we can, which means getting in more hands of where you're actually doing development. And a lot of this concept was created because Gartner released over a number of years, quite frankly, over a decade, the aspect of when bugs are found in code, where is it the cheapest and where is it the most expensive? And when you find when you find bugs in code when you're in development, you have a 1 to a 3x multiplier of what that costs your organization to fix that. When you get into test, it's like 5 to 8. But when you get into production, it can be as high from 10 to 20 times what your budgeted costs are to address those issues. So if cost is the driver here, you want to be as far left of that cost driver as you can. So when the concept of shift left happened based off of what fundamentally was the agile onset of addressing smaller build packages instead of waiting for these long monolithic development cycles to be done. When you broke that out into bits and components in release schedules or cycle schedules or sprint schedules, the next evolution of that is how far left can we make the the testing process specifically, or the acceptance process, is as far left of that process as possible, so that we can make sure that when you find bugs, because it's not a question of if, it's when you find issues with your code, and you find issues with your quality, how are you able to address that? And then fundamentally, what is the price to the business to doing so?
Yeah, so the whole concept of fast feedback. One of the things that I tell people all the time, because I talk to a lot of people who have a lot of project management background as well, is as I start talking to them too about like a Gantt chart. Yeah. Think about your Gantt chart of whether it's an application, a life cycle of a product, or if you're still running stuff as projects. Sure. Doesn't matter, right? It's still left in that time. So shifting that earlier, and that fast feedback, right? If you're going to fail, so the whole manifesto of fail fast, I'm of the, if you're going to fail, you want to fail fast, right? I prefer the, have you tried not failing? But that's just my opinion, right? Let's try not failing. So when we talk about shift left and we're getting closer to the developer, what is it that somebody should look for in from a solution, a set of solutions? Because we're not just talking about functional, right? There's a misconception in the marketplace that shift left means I need to do my functional testing earlier, right? Well, what about performance testing? What about security testing? What about usability testing? All of these things, I think there's a need to have that activity moved earlier in the process. But from your perspective, what when you're talking with a customer, because you guys do consulting, what do you coach a customer or consult a customer to say, these are the things you need to look at from solutions? What are ideal in a solutions from a shift left perspective?
Well, there's probably a three-pronged approach to evaluating what is properly shifting left, if you will. The first part of that is of course functional testing, as you alluded to. We can get into performance testing in UAT in just a minute, of course, right? But from a functional perspective, you're typically looking at what is ultimately pass-fail criteria, right? So that can be for small unit-based test cases, API-driven, test cases or validations, to small component-based, testing sizes, to full-fledged end-to-end integrations across multiple platforms, and whether you're dealing with long-standing order to cash or whatever long integration test scenarios you're ultimately trying to accomplish, and what does shift left in each of those considerations mean. But typically, when you're just talking about a functional test, you're talking about a pass-fail criteria and how you're managing that pass-fail criteria. How do you properly shift left in those conditions? In my best opinion, if you're really putting you're putting more of the testing in the hands of the developer, then you better be working within their IDE. Their IDE specifically allows them to continually be within one and or no more than two platforms where they're basically producing results of what is testing and how often they are testing what ultimately is compiled code or code they want to release or put into lower environments that allow for sort of that next aspect of component testing or end-to-end testing, or just larger, more complex test cases scenarios, right? So to get to what I would consider to be that shift left from a functional perspective, you need to be able to work within the IDEs of the entity that where your developers are working. That's where you will get the most adoption for shift left characteristics. When you start to bleed into performance, there's probably three factors that are the most important to that, in my opinion. So one is the ability to stay within an IDE, which is available now. You saw that initially with the onset of JMeter testing and the platforms that were available for those things. Gatling, which was another aspect where the jump, if you will, for developers wasn't necessarily as big. The onset of cloud and having individuals be able to provision their own environments very quickly for what fundamentally was not only the testing, but the load generation capability that was required to be able to do some of the performance testing initiatives that they were looking for. That allowed people to just, get a little bit more aggressive. Our friend Scott Moore likes to call those people unicorns. But that's okay. Like he's not necessarily wrong. And I'll get to another analogy that Scott and I talked about last October that I thought was very interesting in this whole concept of testing early often and what does that truly look like as it relates to what you're shifting left for performance. But getting back to the second and the third point of what shifting left in performance looks like, again, IDE and cloud provisioning and things is sort of one aspect of it, but self-service. So for a number of years, you weren't necessarily given access. It's a different environment. It's a different infrastructure. It's a different process. It's a different script. That's not true self-service. True self-service is the ability to create, the ability to execute, the ability to report, the ability to make change, and then make it reusable. And it legitimately was not the case 3, 4, 5 years ago that was really truly available to organizations to create that adoption of that type of self-service to be able to do that. And then what I would consider to be the third aspect of shifting left across the testing aspect of one's business is UAT. Now, you're not necessarily going to get users, quote unquote, writing code per se, but you can get them to create business scenarios that then leak in further down left, where the users are then essentially guiding the developers on what they feel are the testing assets that need to be constantly reused, that they then use as a part of how they report up as to what is actually being tested, so that fundamentally the UAT users are not actually trying to assess whether the deployment of that code or that release or those features are being implemented correctly. They're actually, doing what UAT should be doing, which is trying to break something, as opposed to just seeing if it actually works to a acceptance level.
Right.
UAT is truly user acceptance testing, but in order to really truly shift left in that paradigm, you've got to get beyond acceptance and get beyond what ultimately is quality, reliability, and what ultimately will become, moving the needle of real usability, because you start with a set of features, but what does that create? It creates another set of features or sub features. And the user and or the business dictates that. If the user acceptance of that is not, I guess under constant fire, if you will, as it relates to how that works, then that process, for businesses is extremely slow.
Yeah, and I think you hit the nail on the head is getting the end users to be able to contribute, right? So you think about things like if you think in the SAP world,
Sure.
with Signavio, right? So they're in Signavio, they're building business process models. So to be able to have the developer consume that business process model and understand the flow of it, can help drive how they build their tests and how they do their tests from a shift left perspective.
That's right.
So we've talked a lot about shift left. So, okay, then what's shift right?
What's shift right?
Yeah.
So shift right is where you're enabling your users, right? So, it's funny. When I started my career, I was in North Carolina, and I was in the DC area, and then literally a year and a half later, I was in North Carolina working for what ultimately was a SAP AFS apparel and footwear solution implementation for a retailer in North Carolina. And when we got to user acceptance testing, we were dealing with people in the on the floor, if you will, right? Like people that were cutting denim and stuff like that, right? And they had to be able to use the system to make sure it was properly tracked, so that they were getting off of their black and green screens and things of that nature, right? And I remember walking into a room of about 20 people where we're literally showing them like probably the better part of 6 use cases that help those individuals do their job. And we got in front of they all got in front of their user stations. And I kid you not, this happened. Somebody literally picked up a mouse and said, "What's this?" and I went, "Oh boy,
computer.
We're gonna have a long day."
It's gonna be a long day. Yeah.
But again, super great group of people, right? And we got, just like anything, right? You get through it. But when you're properly shifting right, you're dealing with people that fundamentally are not developers. Again, this gets back to, is our code where we want it to be, and where does our needle need to move, if you will, as it relates to our organization, as to how to make better, not only test cases, but better aspects to how we test what our features are, so that we can continue to move the business in the direction that you want it to go in. Whether it's Salesforce and getting that properly implemented. You mentioned SAP, whether it's Oracle eBusiness or any number of ingrown solutions that they're homegrown within an organization. Putting the capability within the users could very, very much be what's needed, especially if an organization makes a decision to say, we're buying this solution because it's 80 to 85 to 90% of what it is out of the box is what we need. Well, when you go and develop that and implement that, then everybody starts finding all the outlier cases of what they require, right? But unless someone's actually in the system and they're able to identify what those outliers are that need true configuration to make the business work, right? Because 80% of your business, lets you keep your cash register open, but it affects 20% of your business, and that could very well be where your profit margins lie as an overall organization, right? Like 20% of our business is how we make 90% of our money,
yep.
Right? 80% of our business is how we run the business. 20% is how we actually make money as an organization, right? So when you have the ability to shift right, you're putting the testing aspect and the ability to get those releases out, those features out, getting it in the hands of the users, and you do that by creating what I consider to be either tactical functional testing that's done by users, and introducing automation, and you're introducing automation in most of those cases off of code suppressed or codeless, or like BDD frameworks, where people can literally, like even in the onset of ChatGPT, they can say, I need to create a BDD framework that runs through this part of my program. How do I create that? Because you think about the onset of like Visual Basic and things, you had to understand how code was written before you could actually write the code. Like BDD is not any different. You have to know the keywords to use to be able to make sure that it's written the way it is. And in some cases, properly shifting right is making that as simple as possible. And if you're introducing automation, which again, in some BDD frameworks, you're doing that, when you toss it over to an automation team, sometimes you don't even need that if you've got what ultimately is a codeless or a code suppressed solution to do that. And then again, it gets back to the 80-20 rule of, most of your automation should work on a pretty easy aspect of business, and then it takes 20% of that to tweak it, to really put it into motion, where you actually see that curve, if you will, of growth and of true executable test cases. So
you talked about the 80-20. We talked about that on a previous session with Diego Dora from Diff Consulting, where we were talking about that 20%, right, that you need to configure and or customize, because customize and configure are different things. But just so the audience is aware, they are totally different things, and we can talk about that maybe in a future session. But that 20% that you need to configure or customize is really business differentiating capabilities, right? So that's what makes your business instead of just any other Tom, Dick, or Harry that's down the street.
Sure.
So when you talk about automation, we talk about this frequently, and it's interspersed in other sessions as well, is that everyone needs to be contributing to automation at this point. And I think we're finally
Everyone
getting
can contribute to automation at this point. Yes.
Well, yeah, now everybody can, right? So I think all along everybody should have. The problem is not everybody could.
Correct.
So you had these people, just like what you were talking about, where the person held up the mouse and said, "Well, what's this?" Right?
What's this?
You're not gonna get that guy to sit down and write code.
And
That's
to be very
just not
clear,
gonna
this was like 24 years ago, 24. So, like, I don't know too many people that are going to say, "What's this?" Right? So I get it.
Well, back then, right? I mean, that was still Y2K, right? This is.
Oh no, it was right before the onset of Y2K. Absolutely.
Yeah. So I mean, the point though is that you have to get into, as you called it, code suppressed, codeless. Yep. Some people say low code, no code solutions. You have to get to that point where it's not scaring off that business user, right? So shifting right, we're trying to get to that business user and get that business user involved. The business user, they didn't go to school and take a computer programming class, right? Like some of us did, right? They didn't go to school and take computer science classes, right?
Most of them didn't.
Most of them are business majors, and did business or maybe fine arts, and they got into this. They do not. You cannot be sitting them down and saying, okay, here, go code this, right? And I think where we are in the industry now, and you talked a little bit about ChatGPT, ChatGPT can help you build some of that from a code perspective. You can ask ChatGPT or Bard or whatever, that the Azure version of it, you can ask that to build you code. But at the end of the day, I think you really need to start getting into leveraging some of the AI capabilities, artificial intelligence capabilities of natural language processing, right? So sure. Where you end up writing things in today, you can write things in near plain English. I think in the future, and some people say I'm crazy, you'll be able to write things with all of the nuance of English. And I think ChatGPT is a great example of that. And as is Bard, where you can write nuanced stuff and ask it a question or ask it to do something, and it'll understand that nuance, sometimes not correctly, but that's evolving, right?
But the thing about that I get frustrated about, where people say, well, it's not perfect. It was like, neither is the paragraph that you just wrote when you're having to do 1,000 words on something. It's called proofreading, right? You have to proofread what ultimately, whatever output that is. That process is no different. The difference is that took probably a third of the time that it probably would have taken you had you done it the good old fashioned way or whatever.
Yep, absolutely.
Like all of this really just, is an aspect of speed.
Yeah. So absolutely. So the speed that you can get something created that's more bulletproof is far significantly reduced now with some of the recent releases of technology that have come out. So we talked about shift left, we talked about shift right.
Yep.
And so when we talk about what's shifting up, so not many people have heard about this concept of shifting up. I didn't invent it. I was on another podcast with somebody, and we were talking about it, and I give credit where credit's due. I don't want to use his name, but it was his idea. If you want to know who it was, you can hit me up later at my email, djackson3@opentext.com, and I'll happy to share it. But I didn't ask his permission ahead of time. So, but he kind of coined the phrase. I'm like, that's fantastic. But what's shifting up?
So shift up isn't really a new concept, right? It's I like to say it's having the view of the world of the business, right? People have been talking about reporting, and people have been talking about KPIs, and people have been talking about, any number of things as it relates to overall visualization. Why are we late? Why are we spending too much money? Why are we, why do we have so many defects in this release? Why do we have all those things? All of that's based off of information. And the question ultimately comes as, how much of that information are you actually getting? How much of that information are you actually able to obtain? And how good is the data behind that information of what it is that you're doing? How are you leveraging that visualization? You know, you could be doing all of the Azure DevOps releases you want, but you know, what is the quality of that? What is the true speed of that? You know, I've known people that have been trying to do DevOps for years, and they're doing, you know, I sort of said this again to bring up my multiple conversations with, let's say, James Pulley, for instance, from Perf Bytes. You know, it's not DevOps, it's DevOps, right? Like, and the answer is because they're saying they can do it, but you know, are they really doing it? I gave another example back again. I'm bringing up Scott Moore again, but you know, we have someone that we know who built an awesome DevOps framework for not only automation but for performance testing. You know, for that one portfolio piece of their business, it was like 4 to 5% of overall coverage, but they could release multiple times a day, and it was fast, it was sound, it was accurate. But when the CIO asked them to scale that, it's like, well, we don't have the people to do that. And like, well, it's automated. It's like, yeah, but there's still manual intervention around that. And the problem that they had within what they were doing is they could not necessarily report those man hours. They couldn't report the need that was in there. So when you're actually talking about shifting up, it's understanding where people are spending their time in these cycles and having an understanding of what that is. You could have situations where you're working twice as hard, but you're not necessarily producing twice as much. Yep. Where there's some cases where you're working half as hard and you're producing 3 times as much. If you're not, quote unquote, shifting up that data, if you're not getting a true visualization of what that landscape looks like and understanding what you're doing and why you're doing it, and more importantly, how you're dissecting what it is you're doing and why you're doing it, so that you can make future business decisions about how you leverage one team versus another team, right? You might not know it, but you might have a stronger, release team. Like, you think about in series of scrums, you've got a series of teams that are building things. And it's like Scrum Team 1, Scrum Team 2, Scrum Team 3. Well, is one better than the other? And why is that? Did one just get the harder aspect of the project and Scrum Teams 1 and 2 are awesome and Scrum Team 3 is always behind? Well, why is that? What kind of data are we looking at? And is that data correct as it relates to how we discern what the outputs of some of those things are, right? So that we can determine, well, we need to add more people to Scrum Team 3 because they're falling behind because,
or is it a scoping issue?
Exactly.
Is it some other form of waste that's
correct? Like, are the
it,
features not clearly defined in Scrum 3 where they were in Scrums 1 and 2? Great example. Did the business not provide the information that's required so that the development teams can do what they need to do and then fundamentally get that out? So again, it's again, plan, developed, execute, and run, right? And you can screw up in any spot, right? Like, you can screw up in how you plan out your releases. You can screw up in how you plan out your features, so that fundamentally you're thinking, okay, you got to do 1 feature, 2 feature, 3 feature, 4 feature, and you're done. It's like, well, no, but feature 1 was really like 35 features. So it's not 1, 2, 3, 4. It's 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1. Now we get to 2. Well, why do we spend so much time on 1? Because 1 really wasn't 1. It was 35 things, right?
Exactly.
It could just be. But again, if you don't have proper visualization over what that is, then you're just going to be quite frankly hunting and pecking for. This is when we get into the finger pointing game of who's doing what and what are you doing with your time and what are you doing with your time? You know what I mean? Like, it's visualization into some of those things. And then fundamentally, when you have to plan your next set of releases for, let's say, the fourth quarter of this year, you need to take the data that you had from, how this, previous set of 3 or 4 quarters worked. And do we need to shuffle that up so that we can determine how to properly plan for what we're trying to release in Q4 of this year? All of that comes out of data that is visualized through, visualization tools or overall, portfolio managers of solution sets. Again, like solutions that OpenText has, right? I almost said Micro Focus, right? Where's the swear jar?
Exactly.
Things like that, right? You want to have visualization as to what you're doing, why you're doing it, and then what information are you trying to glean from that. So whether you're trying to have better testing, you're trying to have more test coverage, this is just better data, and then how are you leveraging that data to make decisions on how you're allocating your resources through your series of releases, cycles, sprints, whatever you're calling it.
I think one of the words that you used frequently in there that I think we should call out and mention is visualization, right? So we're not talking about getting me a report. We're talking about something that you can consume quickly. You know, that old adage of a picture paints 1,000 words is absolutely apropos in this instance.
Yes.
I need a dashboard that I can quickly go up. Whatever that widget is that I'm putting on that dashboard, it's got to convey the message so that it can be consumed quickly and provide the accurate insight into what is going on across your team of teams, right? Yeah. So one of the things that I have a lot of conversations about is there are solutions out there which are designed for and are absolutely fantastic for the individual team. And everyone on the team knows what's going on, and that's great. But when you're talking at an enterprise level where you've got maybe 100 teams or maybe 500 teams, and they all have everything customized their own way, there's no insight that can be gleaned from that information because it's only at that team level. It's not at the team of teams level.
The best case scenario for you is controlled chaos.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's what you have to look for is how do I do that? And I think, frankly, AI is providing another benefit here in that case where AI now can crunch all that data much faster than we used to be able to, right? With big data capabilities that are in the marketplace and AI being laid on top of that, being able to crunch that data, pull that data out and see trendings. So we talked about on one of the previous sessions about some of the things that AI is starting to show us too is not only is it able to crunch data, but it's actually able to start recognizing trends that you may never have seen before. Like, for example, the example that was given then was, well, you know what? When developers commit code on Friday afternoon, their KLOC, so their defects per 1,000 lines of code, goes up by a factor of 3. Maybe that's something we need to look at. How do we address that, right? You know, maybe we should
Thursday night releases and not Friday.
Yeah, exactly. You know, those type of things, and that's kind of that kind of visualization we've never had before, right? We've never gotten that level of analytics before, and I think AI has been helping to do that. So we've talked about AI in the shift up space. What are some of the things that, and we talked about AI in the shift right with natural language processing and some of that. What are some of the, are there any other areas that you feel like AI is really impacting this shift everywhere mentality?
So in the case of like functional testing, where AI is starting to become, the simple way to put it is starting to become a thing, right? But actually, gaining some true traction is around, overall, object recognition of what a site is doing, right? So, one of the biggest parts of automation is maintenance, right? I always make a joke, right? When you're getting into automation and you're trying to do more automation, and you're trying to test with that automation, the number one problem you're going to have with automation is data. The number two problem you're going to have with automation is data. And then most likely the third problem you're going to have with automation is data. The fourth, fifth, and sixth issues are going to be a smattering of issues. But one of them is what's the maintenance cost of that? And again, sometimes maintenance bleeds over into how much data you need to maintain to be able to run through your automation cycles and things of that nature. But the actual maintenance of that script, or the single point of maintenance, or single source of truth, as a lot of people like to say, if I make a change, I've got 1,000 scripts and I make a change in one spot, does it instantiate to the other 300 areas where this same bit of automation is used, or do I have to go change it 300 times? These are all, like, for instance, component-based, testing or keyword-driven testing frameworks, things of that nature, right? Mm-hmm. And where does the evolution of that go? So when you actually talk about AI, what is AI at its core? It's a series of rules, and it's a series of capabilities that allow it to think. It's essentially what the whole concept of, Windrunner was back in the day, for instance, in the Mercury space. Of when you actually tell it to do this, it will do just that very thing, singularly. What AI allows you to do is take a series of what I would consider to be singular types of rules that instantiate themselves into multiple types of scenarios, right? And one of those scenarios is, when you make a change to code that impacts, let's say, a site, it has the ability to recognize that has changed, and that there's a very decent chance that it'll be able to morph that change so that there's no real true maintenance uplift to some of that. When you talk about shift everywhere, again, we're talking left, we're talking right, we're talking up. There's a number of different areas that can be, so let's say, for instance, we're implementing a new accounting system and you've got a bunch of users that are accountants, and how does AI impact them? Well, AI might impact them with the things that are relevant to helping them create what ultimately are better spreadsheets. That those spreadsheets get inputted into the system, and it allows them to view their data differently. And where they used to have to work with 7 or 8 different spreadsheets at one time, the onset of Power Platform and some other things and things around, again, ChatGPT allows them to just use these solutions faster. So this creates what I would consider to be the ability to accelerate and move the bar quicker, faster, better. People talk about their cell phones and they say, isn't it awesome how much stuff we can do to this? Well, Don, you and I are old enough to remember that we thought the flip phones were the coolest thing in the history of the world. You don't have to go far by just watching The Matrix.
Yeah.
Right. And see that they, the phone slid down and then they would call. There was no touchpad to any of that. There was no apps to any of that. And so you have to look at that from a conceptual aspect of, does that make your life better? Does that make your life faster? AI is going to impact us as it relates to the speed of our ability to process what we tangibly have to do in any of those avenues, whether that's writing code and using AI to help us write code faster, whether it's using AI to determine whether or not we've made, we have issues within our code. It could lean towards security and allowing us to do, whether it be dynamic or static code scans a lot quicker and be able to just, have that happen at any given time. When you talk about, again, user acceptance testing, AI will allow people to basically get to a point where they don't have to be someone that has any ability to write code. They can use AI to help them write their cases. So they're creating BDD frameworks or whatever it is, or if they're using a codeless or codeless suppression or code suppression system, low code, no code, whatever that is. AI will help them do those things so that they're now creating true automation. You still need your architects that manage all of this, but fundamentally it's able for you to move faster. And from an up perspective, you just alluded to it before, AI will help you see things that you did not know to look for before. And the biggest aspect of that is, of course, trends, right? And you talk about data lakes and things of that nature, and there's some aspects of different types of data lakes that'll show you different types of things based off of machine learning or AI engines that are table stakes as it relates to what you have within those products. But that's where it impacts, a left, a right, and up kind of environment. We've been sort of dabbling and touching on it as we've been going on here now, but those are truly where you're going to see sort of that shift everywhere mentality be impacted by the onset of what AI will eventually allow us to do. And they will be incremental progress in that. Like, how many people play Angry Birds nowadays? Yeah. Well, no, because there's better games, right? Yeah. But when Angry Birds came out, like, everybody thought, oh my God, look how fun it is to kill all of our days when we're sitting around at the DMV or whatever where we are, right? Like, or with the Michigan here in Secretary of State, or we're sitting in line at a drive-through. Well, you just throw up a game and you play a quick game because what else are you going to do? In this case here, those are time-wasting scenarios that allow sort of certain forms of entertainment. But when you're actually working, there are things that you can do that actually help accelerate what you're doing, so that you can actually focus more on how you can sort of continue to grow what it is that you're doing, as opposed to just sort of the business as normal, business as usual aspect of the way you're doing things.
Yeah. So you talked about the object detection, right?
Yeah.
So using computer vision for that,
Yep.
one of the things that as someone at OpenText, right, we get a lot of the questions on the functional side about self-healing, right, and self-healing,
Sure.
and I said, self-healing's great, but just like the whole fail fast thing, right?
Yeah.
Have you tried not failing? Have you tried not breaking? Right. So with computer vision, you make that underlying object change for whatever reason. There's a reason that you made that change, but you make that change, and the computer vision goes, yeah, I still recognize it. I don't care. I don't care what that underlying technology change was. It's still a sign in button, or it's still a shopping cart, or whatever it is that object is. And I think that's you brought up Windrunner. I when I first saw that, probably 3.5, 4 years ago now, I kind of went, when I was talking with the R&D guys, I went, this is revolutionary. This is to automated testing what Windrunner was back in the 90s, in the mid 90s when it first came out. And because before that, you didn't do automated testing, right? What was automated testing? I threw more people at it, right? I printed off a bunch of spreadsheets and off I went.
There you go. That's right.
So you brought this up a little bit, and I think it's a good question to ask, and it's kind of from my perspective, as you lean back and it says fault consulting. I think this is one of those softballs for you, but there are a lot of people who watch this that are test engineers, right?
Yep.
Their day-to-day job is writing code for testing. And there's some fear out there, right? Mm-hmm. What is this? Am I being AI'd out of a job, right? Is this the end of my career? Am I going to have to go flip burgers now, or what? What does this mean from a consulting perspective? And not just staff aug, but true consulting perspective. What does this impact mean for the industry?
So I referenced our friend Scott Moore a couple of times on this, the time that we've had here, and we had a conversation in October that he published on his journal, and he used the analogy of a carpet cleaner, a dishwasher, and a refrigerator, right? And the carpet cleaner you use like once a quarter, maybe twice a year, maybe once a year. A dishwasher you use every other day, maybe every day. And then the refrigerator you use every day, multiple times a day. And he asked the question of, from a performance testing perspective, how often are customers doing this? And how many different types of personas do you see of people doing, these types of exercises? Do you see more organizations doing the carpet cleaning, or do you see them doing like the dishwasher, or do you see a lot of refrigerators? And my answer to that is we see occasionally entities that are refrigeration capable, right? But they're really still doing things like a dishwasher. And then the vast majority of people that we either are introduced to or we're working with are carpet cleaners / dishwasher, in terms of how they do things, not only from a testing perspective, but a performance testing perspective. So, hey, our application is performing poorly and we don't know why. Hey, we're migrating to the cloud, and where we were on our on-prem instance, we were able to get, 250 concurrent users, and now we're getting 12. Like, we need to figure this out, right? And would AI help with that is the fundamental question. And the answer that I have is, in the performance testing space, we still see customers, if they're doing performance testing at all, doing performance testing like it was 2007. So the last I checked, it's 2023, right? So when we talk about being AI'd out of a job, you'd have to assume that everybody is leveraging the capability of what AI is capable of doing as it relates to how it allows you to speed up some of the efforts and and create better disciplines within one's organization. Those are cultural aspects of whether or not you're making progress, not only within that culture, but as a consultant, you're implying to get structural change within what that is. Those things don't happen over days. Those things don't happen over weeks. Those happen over quarters, half years, and years of continual practice. And so if organizations are trying to leverage AI, as a test engineer or a consultant, you have to have some of those disciplines, and you have to have some of those capabilities. You have to understand the concepts of what you're ultimately trying to, direct onto the customer, direct onto your employer as to what you're trying to do and why you're doing it, and how this can instantiate itself to the developers, to the project managers, to the scrum masters, to the directors, to the CIOs, about what's working and what isn't. And you have some companies that move and shift very quickly, and you have some that move very, very, very slow, right? And so where could you see that this is truly impactful? Well, you still need your test architects and your senior, engineers that can dictate how these processes are in place, or how they mentor developers to work within their IDs, but still get the proper testing coverage that produces the quality data, that data is then quality up into the shift up as it relates to reporting. Because if your data that you're reporting up is not good, then it's garbage in, garbage out. People have heard that for years in IT, right? If your users understand how to create automation, but they're not creating the right automation, and they don't understand how to go do that, then they're going to create, again, use cases, user acceptance tests that fundamentally are duplicative, or they don't provide the certain set of coverage that you're truly looking for in those exercises. You see a lot of testing organizations that have, like an onshore offshore model where it's hybrid. And why do people leverage offshore? They leverage offshore so that they can scale more bodies in, or they can suppress some of the costs with, people that they say, okay, well, if we have a cheaper resource here that fundamentally follows these sets of tasks, then we're able to, do this at a cheaper cost. Or they have some hybrid model where they've got somebody, 1 or 2 or 3 people onshore, and then they've got 5 to 10 people offshore. So could AI take that 5 to 10 and make it 4? Sure. But again, those 4 individuals would need to be leveraging the AI capability and the acceleration of what AI allows it to do that work, to displace those people that you've already, allocated for the amount of work you're trying to accomplish. Again, I used the example before about how we had a customer where, again, they had a bang up DevOps process that allowed them to release code daily, if not hourly. But when they went to try to scale that, they actually went to their CIO of their group, and he was like, scale it. And he was like, well, we still need people to scale this. Just because we have better coverage doesn't mean that all of a sudden we need less people, because in order to scale out that coverage model even more, we have to have eyes on what that's doing. Otherwise, we might be testing, and great, we're testing, but are we testing the right thing? And is the data that we're providing up to what we're testing, and how good our code is? What's the quality of that code? What's the performance of that code? And how you're ultimately shifting that up data. If that fundamentally shows that you're doing more testing, but it's not performant, it's not quality, and it doesn't provide a certain aspect of coverage, AI doesn't fix that for you. Right. The engineers have to go fix that, right? And so, do I see it affecting test engineers? Yes. Do I see it affecting people's jobs? Well, if you're still doing stuff like 2007, then sure, yeah, I can see where that's the problem. But inherently with what you're saying there is a problem, right? So people can look at it that way and say, it's like machine robots on when you and I are in the Detroit area, it's like machine robots on a F-150 line, right? Where, you got the robots that are putting in the glass, as opposed to people putting the glass on the windshields on the cars, or whatever it is, right? Or you see the robots molding the chassis or whatever, right? It's like, well, those were jobs. Well, yes, they were jobs, but those same plants still have people that are literally putting in the seats and literally putting in the radios and literally putting in the floorboards and all of those things, and all the things that are still, better quality made by hands as opposed to those machines. Same thing here. You still need human interaction to move the needle to where AI ultimately provides, inherent help. Again, we keep talking about speed. We keep talking about repeatability. We talk about code coverage. We talk about 80-20 rule. If you're really going to change the 80-20 rule, that's not going to be done with AI. It's going to be done with consulting. It's going to be done with, forward-thinking employees and how they leverage the tools that they have access to. No different than Windrunner. Windrunner allowed us to create a testing scenario and an ecosystem of automated testing. What AI is going to allow us to do is take concepts of speed and make it faster.
Yep. And I think the point that you made very early on in our conversation today about proofing, right? Proofreading, right?
Yeah,
so
exactly.
Is your job going to change? Absolutely, your job is going to change. What you do on a daily basis is going to change.
Yes.
Is it going to eliminate your job? Well, not if you have evolved. If you haven't evolved, I would be worried. But if you've evolved in doing this, you talked about component-based testing and model-based testing on this, right? Yep. It's a different mindset, right? So I remember when I first learned how to write test cases, back in the day, and it was a mindset shift. And once it finally clicked, oh yeah, now I can push these out, no problem. But it's changing that mindset and how you're doing that, right? So instead of, we all use that example of login, right? So I have to log into my system in order to do anything.
That's right.
Right? Okay, so I've got, using your number, 300 different scripts that do login. Sure. If I've got 300 different instantiations of that login capability, I don't want to say code because it might be codeless, right? But if I've got 300 instantiations of that across my 300 scripts, and a change happens that I have to actually go in and make a change, oh my gosh, I better not be doing that 300 times. I need to have it really be referenced back.
That's right.
So from a consultative perspective, being able to change that mindset of these enterprises out there and how they do testing too, and how they do test design as an architect, I think absolutely happens. So I want to thank you, Ryan, for taking the time today. I want to give you one last opportunity. Any parting thoughts that you want to give to the audience?
I mean, everybody keeps talking about shifting left and shifting right and shifting up, and all I keep thinking is, man, I wish manual shifters in cars were still a thing.
It's hard to find them.
Dude, I was looking at a Mustang the other day, Ford Mustang, that convertible with a manual gearbox, and I'm just like, golly, like my first car was a manual, and God, it was so much fun to drive.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like, as you and I sort of are in the years that we're in, right? Like, it's like, I'll just have one of those midlife crises every day, right? What's my midlife crisis of the day, right?
Yeah.
But no. So a parting shot as it relates to just this conversation, shift left, shift right, shift up, like lean in, right? You got to lean into concepts. You got to lean into moving the needle of how things can directly impact your business for the better. How a lot of things can make your jobs better. I mean, I've been a consultant on many jobs, and you work hard, long hours, and in some cases, some of these things that allow you to do the things that you're doing means that you actually get to eat dinner at a sensible hour, and you actually get to do things that you're not working till 10:30, 11 o'clock at night, and then showing up at the office at 7 a.m, trying to make sure that you get enough done before you have to catch your flight at 5:30 at the airport that's an hour away. Like it's that kind of stuff, right? That it allows you to do some of these things and again lean into it so that it These are things that you can use to improve your goals of what you're trying to accomplish for your customer, for your employer. And, they can fundamentally improve your life. No different than the comment I made earlier. This improves our life. Like this tool thing, right? This brick right here improves our life, right? And these types of things and these types of concepts can improve your life as it relates to how you implement them and how you leverage them within your organization and fundamentally make it better.
Well, thanks again, Ryan, for taking the time and sharing your insights in this. So I encourage everyone to come in for our next episode. Our next episode is going to be about modern validation. So when we're talking about validation, we're talking about CSA versus CSV. What's the difference and how it's there? And then we'll have a wonderful guest speaker with us on that one. Thanks again, Ryan, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.
It's good to see you as always, Don. Looking forward to the next time.
If you like the video, please click the like button. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel so that you get notified when we release new videos.